Hello, my name is Davidge, and I'm a total reward and wellbeing advisor, as well as a joint founding member with Dr. Judith Grant of the Workplace Wellbeing Practitioners Forum. This podcast is a continuation of the forum series of interviews where we seek opinions and insights from various experts and practitioners on workplace wellbeing matters of mutual interest. Today, I welcome Darren Laverty, a partner at Secondsight and Foster Denovo. Good morning, Darren.
Good morning.
Darren specialises in financial wellbeing and employee benefits. I originally invited Darren to this podcast to discuss the theme of how to create a strong business case for financial wellbeing. But in a matter of 6 to 8 weeks, this theme has kind of been turned on its head somewhat and overtaken by the COVID-19 pandemic, which, as we all know, is having a massive impact on the physical, mental and financial well-being of our citizens, let alone the wider implications for our government, businesses and society as a whole. So, yes, we will focus on the business case for financial well-being, but it will be contextualised with the current crisis. We will first look at the economic landscape before and during the current crisis to understand how this is having a major bearing on attitudes towards workplace financial well-being and what needs to change going forward to leverage it as a strategic business imperative. And, of course, the reason Darren's on the podcast today, how he thinks financial education providers can help guide employers down that pathway. Right, before we get into that, however, Darren, could you please give a brief explanation of Secondsight and Foster Denovo and talk more about your role within the group?
Yeah, thanks, Evan. So Foster Denovo Group is one company with two divisions, if you like. One division is your traditional private wealth management kind of advice process. The other element of the business, the other division is Secondsight, which is an employee benefits company. And I suppose it's about 60-40 split in terms of the size of the organisation, 60% to the private wealth side. What I do at a high level is I'm an equity partner in the group. And so I get involved with the other equity partners and the executives on a regular basis. And I'm involved with, high level strategy and direction of the business. And if in times of a crisis like we're currently having, obviously we have extraordinary meetings to discuss how we're going to deal with those problems as well. But on a day-to-day basis, I work in the Secondsight part of the business. And my main focus and passion is on the proposition development. And it was very much focused, going back the last 5 years, on how to financially educate employees. And that's kind of morphed and evolved now into financial well-being in a much more holistic and general approach. So financial education is where it all started, but it's now very much focused on how financial education has a positive impact on financial well-being.
Yeah. I think it's fair to say we've seen quite a transformation in, if you want to call it, originally known as financial education, but become, as you put it more holistically, financial well-being. And it's an area which I've been very keenly interested in for quite a number of years. So I was quite intrigued by your book, which you released about 3 years ago, because you do call yourself an author and you have every right to do so.
Yeah.
And I think it was called Make Their Money Count, How to Run an Effective Workplace Financial Education Program, an employer's guide. A real mouthful there, if you like. But it's fair to say it's earned 5-star reviews on Amazon. Good to see. So could you tell us a bit more about what motivated you to write the book, and what influence do you think it has had since with workplace financial well-being?
Yeah, thanks. So what motivated me was that I've been doing this job now for 31 years. I started in this industry in June 1989, so I've nearly 31 years. And in that period, my primary focus has been, especially in the first half of it, is persuading people to save money, and that was kind of it. And I realised that persuading people was an art, and I realised that human beings are very emotional people, and they make emotional decisions. And I believe that the priority of a financial education program is to positively influence people to take positive action. And if we are emotional beasts, we need to be motivated emotionally. My industry is full of very, very well-meaning, very bright, highly educated people, but they don't see that element of it. And I believe that financial well-being, 80% of it is the psychology, whereas my industry focuses very much on the mechanics. And so what I found with education, it's very much focused on technical financial things, and it's delivered in a very dry way, and it wasn't really gaining much momentum, and it started to actually be seen negatively. You get the pension guy turns up at the company and does a pension presentation, and nobody wants to go because their expectations it's going to be their expectations is going to be quite dry.
Oh my God, not a pension briefing, used to say that.
Exactly, and nobody wants to go.
Yeah, but I must admit, the one thing that I first came to my when you first came to my attention was you probably one of the first people who actually delivered what I would call an illuminating pension briefing session. So big tick in the box for me, and I actually thought, yeah, this is the way to, if you like, bring pension matters to life.
Yeah. So what the reason being is that most of the industry, I mean, again, don't get me wrong, they're good people, but they focus on the when, the how, the what. What I focus on is the why. If you think about it, if you get employees to want to do something strong enough, you don't even need to provide them with anything. They'll find their own way if the motivation is there. We have access to so much information out there now. They can just Google the solution if the desire is there. So I focus very much on a couple of elements, which is how do I get to people's psyche? How do I get to the emotional decision-making process? The technical stuff, you need to offer that to people, but you need to do that after the emotional decision has been made. So, for example, I need to save money. That is very logical, and we can tell people all day long, you need to save into your pension because you get matching contributions, tax relief. It's cheaper if you do it over a long period. That's all logic. We still have a problem with people not saving enough. The reason they don't save enough is because they don't play the movie of their life into the future and see clearly where they're heading. And we're motivated by two primary motivators in life, pain and pleasure. And for 2 million years, our brain has been wired up to avoid danger, for survival. And that's kind of how we're wired up. And so if people can see the future and it doesn't look too good, that is an attention-grabbing moment. It's an emotional moment that they want to avoid that pain. And so then you focus them very quickly on what they want. What is it you really want? And then they start to polish that up and make that more real. And then you'll find the motivation comes. And then they're saying, right, what do I need to do? And the perceived pain of saving today, it suddenly becomes less than the perceived pain of not saving in the future.
Yeah. Saving for the future, there's always pain involved. And as you put right at the beginning, it's an emotional experience, and some people would take the comfort of living for today rather than tomorrow.
Yes, because their tomorrow's not vivid enough. That's the problem. If individually, now, if you go back years ago, let's go back to, the 70s, the 80s, and even into the 90s, there were about 300,000 or 400,000 people out there in the society who are persuading people to save money. And these were your life assurance agents. These were the man from the Pru or the lady from the Providence. And they were going out to their friends and their communities and their clubs and their churches, and they were persuading people it'd be a good idea to save money. But what happened was, over time, is that the products they were promoting weren't very good. And so the industry kind of regulated them out of the industry. Most of them have gone. The amount of people out there now doing those roles is about 11 or 12,000. There's about 20,000 regulated advisors, but not all in investment. And so they only really work with people who've got money. So the people that need to be persuaded to save haven't got that anymore. The finance industry started to focus on where the money was, and the money was in debt and credit cards. And so the emphasis went there instead, and it started to encourage people to borrow rather than to save. And in fact, you look at the advertising for it. I don't know if you remember, some people are too young to remember this, but there was the marketing of the flexible friend, the Access credit card. And they even had a little an image of a pound note next to the credit card, and it was the poor relation to the credit card. It tried to normalise debt. And then we got into some of the payday lenders having old people friendly puppets to normalise that kind of borrowing as well. So that's where the focus in finance went. And the bit that persuades people that psychologically it's a good idea to financially plan and save, that's gone. And it's kind of come round full circle now. And I think responsibility now sits with an employer. And that's the only really angle we can come at now to actually try to positively influence good behaviour across the masses.
We'll come back to that a little later about the shared responsibility, if you like, between government, businesses, stroke employers and citizens. Because clearly this current crisis has exposed the fault lines, if you like, quite significantly in terms of financial well-being. So can we just turn to the current crisis, financial well-being? This is what's uppermost in everyone's minds at the moment. And so what I'd like, may I sort of first say that it is the view of many commentators that this crisis has magnified many of the financial inequalities in our society. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we're all running around at 100 miles an hour before this happened. And now suddenly we're all stopped. And sometimes it's when you stop, you notice things around you that you don't notice before because they're just not important. They're not. I mean, in our brain, we have this thing called the reticular activating system. And it doesn't actually, what it does is it filters out things we just do not need to be aware of right now. But suddenly when you stop and you start to notice how important people that stack shelves in supermarkets are, we used to look down upon them. I'm just a shelf stacker, We need them people. They're risking their lives to feed us.
Well, effectively, they're key workers, aren't they?
They're key workers. It's all the key workers, cleaners, shelf stackers, nurses, delivery people. These people are now actually risking their lives, and they're on very low income. And I think, we'll come out of this probably a much fairer and a more decent society. It's kind of slowed us down, stopped us in our tracks, and actually made us focus on what's important. You start to notice the little things. You start to realise how important engaging with human beings is when you can't do it. Do you know what I mean? So I think, yes, it has magnified the inequalities. So I do feel that, hopefully this will be a change for good. Ultimately, we come out the other end of this. Hopefully it will be a change for good. And we'll start, instead of having what we've had, very, very diverse political views, we'll start to bring things back more to the centre like they were historically.
Yeah, we'll come on to that a little later, Darren. But it's interesting that there was a study released this week by the Institute of Fiscal Studies, which showed that women and the under 25s are bearing the economic brunt of the coronavirus lockdown. And it's, the worst affected industries, whether they're hospitality to retail, are staffed disproportionately by young people and women. Even the companies that have closed down to avoid the spread of COVID-19 employ 30% of all employees under the age of 25. So do you think systemically or structurally something has to change going forward? as you say, from perhaps one of the sort of fallout from the current crisis?
Well, I just think it's going to happen naturally now. I think this, because we've had to stop in our tracks, because we're noticing these things, we've got time to think about them and evaluate them. We can also see the importance of these things. I just think naturally we're developing, and this is a moment in time we're never going to forget. I don't think the world's going to be the same afterwards. This world will get a bit better. We'll probably revert back to type a wee bit. We'll probably get back to old habits to a degree. But I do think this has been, even though this is a horrible, horrible situation and nobody likes it and it's awful that people are dying around us, when we come out the other end, we've got to hope that some good comes out of it.
Okay, so let's revert back to the now then. We'll come back on tomorrow a bit later. So let's focus on how employees should be supporting their employees during the current crisis. Providing financial support to employees during the crisis has been extremely challenging for many employers, themselves suffering from financial distress. Although the government has offered some relief by paying up to 80% of wages, what we've seen is that many employers have had no alternative but to ask their employees to take what you would call a pay haircut, go on a furlough, or even be made redundant. Now, never in peacetime, certainly in my lifetime anyway, has the relationship between the employer and their employees have been put under such strain by uncontrollable events. But the fact remains that employees need to rise to this challenge and offer whatever financial support and advice that they can feasibly achieve. I was interested in an article with well-known author Gethin Naden, who's Director of Employee Wellbeing at Benefex, and he set out 4 ways in which employers can provide financial well-being during the pandemic. The first point he made was that something I can always testify to: explain your employee benefits. So, what is statutory sick pay? How is it paid? How much is paid? And then looking specifically at group risk benefits. So you're looking at group income protection, or even, dare I say it, life assurance. I was interested talking to one of my students on the CIPD reward course, who said they were having a hell of a job getting quite a few of their employees to update the beneficiaries, because, as always, people think it's never going to happen to them. And there was one particular sad case where an individual was fighting for their life, and they hadn't given a beneficiary because there's not a lot they can do at that stage. And then the second point he mentioned was about encouraging employees, if you like, to ask lenders for help. And we have seen quite a bit of publicity around payment holidays, whether it's rent, for instance, or mortgages. The third one, it was to ease employees' minds on market panic. Now you think, well, actually employees, not all employees are really investors, but of course they are in many cases, particularly if you look at defined contribution schemes, which are clearly affected quite significantly by the external market. And it's trying to calm them down around the sort of volatility, if you like, of stock markets globally. I'm sure you have a view on that. And the fourth one was to, funny enough, promote financial education during the crisis, because as always, the scammers are out in force, the fake emails are out there, and they're going to new depths and really attacking vulnerable citizens. Now, I know that Secondsight has been looking at workplace financial well-being in this context, and you are rolling out this week a whole series of live online sessions, pulling in all your financial well-being collateral and material. Could you explain more about this new webinar series, what it will cover, and how both employers and employees can access it?
Yeah, so obviously a lot of the work we do is through conferences and events, which are now all cancelled or postponed. And so our thinking was that, there's going to be a lot more people now working from home. And when you work from home, again, I haven't felt this, but I know a lot of people are feeling that they're not quite so busy. They haven't got to travel, so they've got a bit more time in their hands. and there's a little bit less work to do in certain circumstances. And I know HR people are completely slewed out at the moment for another few weeks probably, but it is an opportunity when we stop and take stock. You can't see what's going on around you when you're running at 100 miles per hour. So now the fact that we've stopped, what I decided to do was to take all of our collateral, all of the financial well-being collateral and content that we have, and to put it into a bunch of webinars and put it online so that people, and then run these for several weeks, multiple times, so that when people have got half an hour spare, they can dive on. And hopefully from an employer perspective, what they can do, they can start to learn what they need to know, because most people they haven't kind of attacked financial well-being yet. They've looked at emotional, physical well-being and mental health, but the poor relations to the well-being programs financial, but I think now these come to the forefront. You can solve all the other well-being issues if you've got the finances taken care of. And whilst we come out the other end of this problem, we start to return to normality. Physical and emotional, mental well-being will probably start to restore itself when we get back to a normal routine, but the financial damage will stay there. So what we've done initially is to put everything out there free of charge for anyone who wants to jump on it and learn what they can, so they're better prepared when things do normalise to actually hit the ground running with their own financial well-being programs and strategies. So from an employer perspective, we've come up with a whole bunch of webinars. One of them is to how to strategically identify where the financial stress lies within an organisation, because it's the sort of thing that people don't want to talk about. But there is a very simple, easy way that's very credible and well researched to find that out. It takes literally a minute of employees' time, but if an employer can find out strategically exactly where the biggest levels of financial stress are, then they can be strategic in their intervention. What happens all too often is there's a lot of mudslinging at the wall, hoping some sticks. But actually, we just need to be
scattergun approach, as they put it.
That's right, and it's just not going to work. And what happens is the momentum and the motivation from the person that's in charge of it starts to wane when they don't get the engagement they want. So that's one thing. The other thing I noticed that there's 4 big mistakes that employers are making, big mistakes with their financial well-being. So I'm identifying them and putting them out there so that employers can see them now and avoid them. Very simple. They can get to the crux of what's important much quicker and avoid tripping up and making mistakes along the way. So there's 4 big mistakes that they make. The other thing is how to create an effective workplace financial well-being strategy. So whilst it's not a financial education program, a financial education program is one of a number of things that you would put into a strategy. But most companies, what they're doing, they're looking at financial well-being interventions, which are often financial services businesses who are getting their attention by talking about financial well-being, but they're often offering things for free. And the danger here is what's the potential secondary benefit to them of offering it for free? Well, they're leading employees to either get their hands on their money or to lend them money. And you just got to be a wee bit careful. You just need to know what we're dealing with here. So be wary, if it's free, for example, just being aware. So having a strategy to make sure we put the right interventions to the right people at the right time in order of priority and budget is really key. I've also come up with, I did it on a blog, and I've also put it into a webinar now, and that is 10 ways to create a budget for financial wellbeing, because a lot of employers are struggling with that because there's been very little budget put towards it.
We'll come on to that a little later, Darren, because that's going to be really interesting, and I think this will be prevalent in the aftermath, if you like, of COVID-19.
I agree. The other thing is a lot of employers need to understand what financial wellbeing really is. So I've researched it, and we've put together the official definition of financial well-being. So if you know what it is, then you know what you're aiming for. Most people, if you don't set a target, you can't hit it. So we just need to know, and it comes in. There's 4 pillars to it. Okay, and then the other thing is we need to find out what employees want as well as what they need. So I've got a webinar, how to identify exactly what they want and how to get what they want out of them. And then more employee-focused stuff is 5 financial planning opportunities in a financial crisis. And crisis is an interesting word because if the Chinese way of saying crisis is made up of two words, and it actually means danger and opportunity. Well, that's quite fascinating. So there are 5 financial planning opportunities in a financial crisis. There are 5 top tips to take control of finances. And then the one which I think is very relevant to what you just said a minute ago is called Keep Calm and Carry On, an investment market update. And one of the key things here is that a lot of people are looking around for social proof to decide what to do about their money. And when you lose money, people panic and they want to run away from what they fear. But actually, that's counterintuitive. Yeah. That's what most people do, and that's why most people lose money. Actually, probably, for a lot of people, the best option is actually to invest more. Let's buy in while things are cheap, and let's benefit from the bounce back, because this situation is temporary. And if you look at bear markets and bull markets, the bear market averages about 8 years on it, and it goes up a lot more. The bear market, when it goes down, it averages about 1.3 years, and it never goes down as much as the bull market goes up. So, there's a lot of things a lot of lack of information tend to lead people to do what others do, and that's not always the right thing. They look for people that have got certainty.
It's following the herd mentality, isn't it? Without actually having a much more intelligent understanding of what as you put it,
people need more. They need more. They need more information. They need more information to make a better judgment on their own situation, rather than going with what seems to be socially acceptable. Because somebody seems so certain, just because they're certain, doesn't necessarily mean that they're right. And so we're the employee-focused webinars. Employers are very welcome to jump on those as well. They're evolving daily, because we're learning and we're talking to clients and we're responding to situations and solving those problems daily at the moment. So people want to access those. They're on the Secondsight website, which is second, spelled in full, second-sight.com. And if you go to our events, they're all on there. You can register for those. You'll get an invite to your Outlook, and it's all done on Zoom. It's all very good. And the other great thing is I'm getting lots of great feedback to develop it further from people.
Okay. We'll put the links at the end of the podcast so that listeners can see where to go from there. So let's move on. So hopefully in the not too distant future, we will see some form of recovery, as you alluded to, with businesses trying to get back on their feet and employees trickling back to work. But saying that life will return to normal is perhaps stretching a point. There will be huge disruption. There's going to be deep financial scars felt on both sides, and the recovery and healing process is going to take months or even years. Right at the beginning, you mentioned about the sort of dilemma for businesses going forward and society as a whole. But turning really to businesses, we all know they've been hell-bent on the profit motive, and that's been sort of characterized by bonus culture. And that kind of phenomenon has been going on for probably the best part of 20 years. But some of the top chiefs out in industry now, one of them, Bernard Looney, the boss of BP, I noticed an article in the Times this week that he said this crisis has helped make clear that the world in which the sole objectives of a company's purpose is to maximize profit is no longer acceptable. So I think it's fair to say we will see much tighter scrutiny post-COVID-19 to ensure that businesses do exercise more social responsibility and adopt what you would call a humanistic approach, especially when you think that many of them will have survived in some capacity on taxpayers' support. So moral responsibility will invariably extend to their communities and to the financial well-being of their greatest asset, their employees. So if you were an employer, what, in your opinion, do you think you should be targeting or prioritizing in relation to the financial well-being of your employees? Because whichever way you look at it, Secondsight and Foster Denovo are employers. So what's your views on that, Darren?
Well, every company's different. Every demographic's different. I mean, when I do some work with employers and I look at, sometimes we have to break the two communities down and look at their needs differently. So you can look across the board and you can get a consensus of opinion. But if you chop, the one good example, I'm working with a company where they've got 900 employees, 300 are office based, 900 are off site. Some working from home, some working on client sites. And they were suspicious that the needs of those two communities were quite different. And when we did some testing and surveying, we're absolutely correct. It was very different. So we had to come up with two strategies for that particular organisation. So I would say that in terms of targeted prioritising, we need to kind of do three things really. Number one, we need to identify exactly what the needs are of their employees, and there is a way of doing that. There is a way of strategically pinpointing exactly where the biggest areas of need are. If we have two distinct communities, we need to keep the results of that assessment separate. One of the ways of doing that is through a financial wellbeing assessment, which was developed in the States 20 years ago by academics. It's been finely tuned. It's been done over 1 million times across 80 countries for the last 20 years. I've got access to it. It's really powerful. There is a webinar on it called How to Strategically Identify Where the Financial Stress Lies in Your Organisation. And it shows people how to do this piece of work very quickly and easily. And also I give it to them for free of charge. They can have this assessment. It produces reports for employees. It takes them literally a minute, but there's a corporate report which the employer needs to just find out where the need is. Then you can start to piece together your program. The second part is they need to also find out what employees want, because addressing needs is, okay, but we need to give people what they want. But sometimes employees don't always know exactly what they want because it's not contextualised or given meaning in their own life. And so we need to talk to them. We need to make them a bit more aware. So we need to educate them to a degree. I call it awareness, and it's in my book. There's a four-step process on this education thing, where step 2 is awareness. Chapter 3, if you read that. But it's important to make people a bit more aware before we ask them what they want, because then we get the right answers. But the third thing is we need to make sure we build all of this upon solid foundations. And solid foundations can be often supported by a really good, well-communicated, well-appreciated employee benefits package. Most of them, and I've been doing this for 15, 20 years now, most of them are not appreciated fully. They're there, mechanically, they're a good package. But if the employees don't appreciate them in the context and meaning of their own lives, then they're not getting full return on investment. So there's that gap. We've got to bridge that piece as well. Yeah. So sometimes it's just getting the best value out of what they've already got.
I can really relate to that, because I can remember in my early days employee benefits, where we were looking for the next best benefits technology, if you like, to deliver our portfolio benefits. And communication was kind of like a bolt-on. And one thing I learned in those days is that communication, especially when it comes to employee benefits, you're trying to maximize take-up and engagement, is that you need to communicate from day one. And that's listening to the key stakeholder group, your employees.
That's right. That's right. And so you have to, but again, they don't always quite know. So we have to sometimes just make them a bit more aware. One of the ways I found is to run a forum where you cover lots of financial topics in a fun and engaging, interactive way, just to put things on the radar. Now, I'll give an example. When we surveyed employees and we said, how important is it to you to learn about estate planning, trusts and wills? It was bottom of the list, because it was put across in a way which is doesn't mean much to them. When you actually, and I'll tell you where it comes, when they can see the benefit of the benefits package to their own family, suddenly they pop up. So when you explain how important it is to make sure we preserve family wealth for the next generation, we've got student debt, we've got getting on the property ladder, we've got pensions and annuities and all those things, suddenly it becomes, in a lot of companies I've done this, estate planning, wills and trusts jumps up to become number one financial educational topic, because it now got a meaning to them in the context of their own lives and their own family. And what I notice is all the family stuff jumps to the top when they understand it.
We always talk about the financial life cycle, where people have different needs throughout their lives, if you like. It is a bit stereotypical. It kind of gets turned on its head. nowadays, especially when you've got people entering into the property market a lot later in life, and where you've got people working beyond the default retirement age, which is a bit of a moving feast.
Yeah, that's correct. So, I mean, there is so much to do, Evan, and it's where do you start? But the key thing for employers is this: that there is one of the blockers for financial well-being is that some employers just don't know where to start. There's so much out there. There's so much to think about. They get consumed with choice. And so this is why it's so important to actually do some initial work, do some fact finding with your own people. So let's find out what their needs are. Let's find out strategically where the highest levels of stress are. And that's going to change over the next couple of months. Let's find out what they really want. And let's make sure we fully integrate and bring through their financial employee benefits right through and support that from an emotional perspective. And let's get that emotional connection between those benefits, because one of the key things for well-being, one of the key things is that people have in the back of their mind, they procrastinate at getting their family affairs taken care of. And this is like basic will writing, enough life assurance, income protection, because it's not something that they focus on daily, but actually it's in the back of their mind and they procrastinate because it feels complicated. But actually a good benefits package, well communicated, can actually give them that support they need, and then they can start to work on their needs and on their wants.
Yeah. So you're talking about procrastination?
Yeah, well, we're all guilty of that to a degree, and I think sometimes when things are made more important, then we avoid procrastination. We procrastinate on things where it seems less important. There's always something in the short term which is a bit more important today. And one of the pillars of financial well-being is that we have in our psychologically we have solid economic foundations, and that comes from having no debt, having no high interest toxic debt, which I call it, which is your credit cards and overdrafts and payday lenders. Also having an emergency fund. You know, there's surveys out that say that half of the working population couldn't get their hands on £1,000 in an emergency. Well, in an emergency, you've got to find the money. So if you haven't got the cash, you have to go and borrow. So the emergency fund stops that downward spiral going down the wrong road. But the third part of the solid economic foundations is to make sure that you feel in your heart of heart you've done everything you can to protect your family. And with those three things in place, you have solid economic foundations. So emergency fund, no debt, family taken care of. That's one of the four pillars of financial well-being.
So I think it's fair to say, Dan, looking at the future workplace financial well-being, it is fast becoming the new mantra, the new imperative. And the big issue, as we both know, with workplace financial well-being, it has kind of been what I call the Cinderella of a strategic well-being program for many of the reasons which you've already covered in quite some depth. And yet, I know, and you know, there's been a lot of evidence in recent years showing that it is a major cause of mental health conditions. So, assuming you're going to be at the forefront, Secondsight that is, of persuading employees to get on board with workplace financial well-being, I'd just like to touch on the blog you did fairly recently about the 10 ways to secure a budget for workplace financial well-being. Because whenever you talk to HR in particular, who seem to be landed with this responsibility, it's always been regarded as a nice to have initiative. I would like to think that we've reached a crossroads now with financial well-being, and that employers will see quite starkly that actually it's absolutely fundamental. Would you agree with that? And would you like to explain a bit more about how you would secure a budget?
Yeah, so I think there is lots of practical things, and my blog goes through the practical stuff. A lot of people want to see what are those practical things they can do now to free up budget, where they might be wasting money or they're not spending money wisely. I think the most important thing here is a psychological shift. What happens is that an employer sometimes I find occasionally, some of them are serious about it, but some are not quite so serious, and they're kind of ticking a box in the well-being space. We've got to get the financial well-being sorted out. They give it to somebody, to deal with in the organisation. Typically HR, but various different people pick this job up. I've even seen health and safety people pick it up, but they don't give them the tools. They don't give them the resources, the time. They've also, often they've got a full-time job to do anyway, and they get given this job to do, and they're already flat out doing their day job. So first thing what they need to do is to actually to take it seriously. We need to give that people some tools and some resources. And that individual, my suggestion to them, or what I've found works really well, is they have to do their homework. They have to research, have to learn about it, and they need to buy into it, and they need to believe it. And what happens is they go to leadership teams and they get pushback sometimes about budget. Now, can you go and sort out well-being? What budget have I got? Well, there's no budget. Just do what you can. That's often what happens. So I'm saying,
been there, yeah.
Yeah, you've been there. So what I say to people is, look, if we can get, and I've got the web series will help these people get there. Let's get the people that have got the responsibility trained up, absolutely, as much as they can, whilst tools are down, while we got working from home. Because when they come out the other end, if they believe more strongly in the importance of financial well-being in their organisation, if their belief that it's important is stronger than the leadership team's belief that it's not important, they will influence them. That's the key magic here. They've got to believe it, and they've got to go there, and they've got to go into this full tackle, and say, look, this is what I've learned. This is why we've got to do it. So that emotional commitment to it, to influence the management team is really, really important. So the other thing is, then you've also got to start small steps. So there's and I've wrote this blog on it. I've also done it as one of the webinars. There's 10 ways to create a budget for it, and I won't go into the whole 10 now because it'll be forever. But there is lots of little things we can do. That we will.
Yeah.
There's lots of little things we can do. Just simple things like, if most people run a pension on a salary sacrifice basis, let's then invest some time in encouraging people to save more, because that's good for them. By them saving more, the employer gets more national insurance saving they can spend on other well-being, financial well-being. Do you know what I mean? So when people think, oh, I've already got salary sacrifice, well, that's not the point. Are we utilising it as much as we can? If we get people to save the right amount of money for their own future because they want to, and they're happy to do that, and that comes from education and influencing them in a positive way, then there's 13.8% of whatever they pay savings to the employer, and they can utilise that how they want. And then they can spend a bit. And then if they've done an assessment today and they measure where they are today, and in a year's time they redo it, and you can show an improvement on a score, you've got something empirical to show the management team, you can start to turn that into a return on investment. Or if you can't do that, you can at least turn it into a value of investment. And it is a bit of a blunt instrument, but it's kind of directionally correct, and it's hard to argue. Yeah. I think it's going to be an easier conversation going forward in terms of the importance of it. I still think we're going to have the budgetary problems, not because, for different reasons now, not because the motivation isn't there, but because literally the money might not be there for a while. So we need to do small steps, bit at a time. And the 10 ways to create budget are some, a number of small steps that employers could do. Even just looking at their group risk benefits, restructuring them. Some of them are out of date. Do a full market review, not just a unit rate review. Look at some of the payout terms on income protection policy. They cost a lot of money. If you reduce them down, you still cover 95% of claims, but you've halved the cost. Things like that, and so it's just a refresh, and so just a proper financial well-being review of employee benefits is a really good way of raising some cash that's already.
But as we discussed earlier, Darren, the goalposts have moved because people are going to be coming back to work, and there's going to be an awful lot of them who are going to be financially distressed. And that's going to be a big issue for employers who are trying to get people up to full productivity. And as we all know, if you're saddled with debt as a result of this crisis, you're not going to perform to your best. So employers will be looking to their employers and looking for some support, because ultimately they do trust their employers rather than leave themselves to, if you like, the vagaries of the financial services market.
I agree. Well, there are tools out there to help people. I mean, employers could, if people are in debt, they could, once they are free of we're beyond the COVID-19 issue. They could support people, but with loans and have them paid for from their salary. They don't have to charge interest on it, or they might have to charge a minimum interest, but they wouldn't be paying the sort of interest payments they'd be paying on overdrafts and credit cards. So there's things they could do there. There are some good providers of payroll loans. Now, you just got to be careful with these companies. They do have fantastic proposition. We just got to make sure our employees don't create new debt with them. What we want them to do is to actually control current toxic debt and get out of that. And so a good there are lots of tips that you can give people. So, for example, someone's got a bunch of credit cards and they're trying to pay them off, but they don't seem to be making a dent in them. Well, pay the minimum payment on the two big ones. Pay as much as you can on the smallest debt, clear it. Psychologically, you've made progress. Then you go to the next one and you pay the minimum on the largest one, and you're suddenly, when you can see progress, you get motivated. People lose the will to live and get despondent when they can't see progress, but they get addicted to progress. And that habit of paying those things off, you need to catch them at the right moment and convert it to savings once they're out of debt. So there's lots of things that employers can do like that. So third-party support or provide it themselves.
Okay, so we've probably got two scenarios here. We've got post-COVID-19, employees coming back. What are the initial steps that perhaps employers should be taking, if you like, to assess or evaluate where the people are, what's actually on their minds, what's preventing them from working productively. And then you've got a longer term strategy, as you talked about, where you're kind of creating baby steps or capability steps to try and work towards a single vision, whether that's part of financial well-being or part of a broader strategic well-being program. So let's just focus on the initial one then. So your guys have come back to work in the first month, and they're all looking pretty frazzled, probably from a combination of remote working and perhaps not being on their normal remuneration. What would you recommend to employers that they do?
Well, firstly, we just need to assess where the problems are. We can't just guess this. Also, we haven't even got there yet. So the thinking in this area is all brand new. We're still thinking it now. In the last few weeks, we put some stuff together, which has been very well received. And it was really kind of basic housekeeping stuff. So, for example, I actually did it all myself. And we've got to help people take control. It's when they feel bad, it's because they feel out of control of most things financial. If we can help them feel in control of most things financial and keep them there, then they feel okay. Then they can live, they can cope, they can function, they can be innovative, and they can be creative at work and communicate well. So, but there are some practical little things we can do, just some housekeeping things. Like, for example, how much money is going out on unused mobile phone apps? How much money is being wasted on phone contracts you could be reduced with a phone call? What about PayPal? They have pre-approved payments, but the mobile phone apps, the PayPal, these kind of things, they seem to, I don't know if they do it on purpose or not, I might be a bit cynical here, but they seem to make it quite difficult to actually cancel things or cancel subscriptions that you don't use anymore. It's very intuitive to buy the stuff, but it seems to be quite difficult to actually cancel it all. And so we've got to persevere, and work through these things. So, I noticed that, for example, both PayPal and Apple, I noticed that the way that you do these things changes. So one year you do it one particular way, then it's changed a bit because you do a software upgrade. So it's just persevering with these things, and actually you can start to save lots of wasted money. I mean, I actually did it myself, and I saved well over £1,000 a year just on PayPal, mobile phone apps, and my mobile phone contract and my TV package. Just those alone, and I just spent a morning. Now, one morning has earned me £1,000 a year effectively. So those are some of the small practical things we can start to do to get people going down the right road. But the key magic here is, if they haven't had a pay cut, if they haven't been furloughed, those people actually are just a bit better off, and why not sell them on the idea of saving it instead? So whilst we've done some housekeeping and reduced some costs, got rid of some unnecessary wastage, why don't we convert it as a small step into savings? Because we're no worse off, and then start to build an emergency fund. Some people say emergency funds need to be 3 months pay, 6 months of expenses. Those could take a couple of years to build up. But why don't we just aim small? Let's aim for a £500 one to begin with. That, might be able to do that within 3 or 4 months. So just some housekeeping is a really good place to start, and that gets people going. That gets some momentum.
That's excellent advice, actually. But the important thing you mentioned right at the beginning of that piece was actually getting employees to take full control or full responsibility, not defer to the employers. I mean, employers there obviously to try and facilitate, provide that process. And they need people like you to come in. I think you're going to be a busy guy at the after
hopefully.
COVID-19 has gone away one day. Okay, we've covered an awful lot of ground here, Darren. It's been great. I just wondered if we could culminate this podcast in asking you, what kind of advice would you like to offer employers on financial well-being? It's a bit of an open question. So if you can break it down. Well,
I'm going to keep it quite simple, actually, and that is that whilst there's a million things we can be doing, we need to be doing the right things for the right people at the right time, so we need to be strategic. If you look at social media marketing, it's very targeted adverts, and it gets people to have an impulse reaction, and then they buy stuff. We need to use the same thinking with financial well-being. So we need to ask some questions and find out some facts and some data and be strategic with it. So that's the first thing. So, finding out what's going on rather than just me telling you, here's something you could go and do. It may or may not be relevant for that particular organisation. The other thing I would say is don't dabble. I find that some companies are dabbling at this, and it's like anything. If you're playing rugby and you go in half tackle, you're going to get hurt. We need to go into this wholeheartedly with an outcome. We need to focus on what we want here at the other end of it and keep moving towards that and adjust and adapt along the way. So don't dabble is my second piece of advice. My third bit is, it's difficult, I know, but don't try and do it on the cheap. Okay, there's a lot of tools out there that come with strings, and actually those strings could make people worse off. So, even if it's a small amount, it's a positive thing. Once you can see a return on investment, you can then reinvest the return on investment into the future. So don't try and do it on the cheap. If you want to run a good financial, well-being program, that should really be paid for rather than doing it piecemeal. So that kind of dovetails with dabbling, but, fact find, go at it wholeheartedly, and don't try and do it on the cheap. Actually, it's false economy to do it on the cheap, because you won't improve the well-being in the other areas. It's almost impossible to have emotional and physical well-being without financial well-being.
That's very good advice, Darren. I'd like to thank you for this very comprehensive, very interesting advice you've given us over the almost an hour now, actually. So, Darren Laverty, partner at Secondsight and Foster Denovo, thank you very much for your contribution today.
Yes, lovely to talk to you again, Evan, and all the best, and stay safe, and everybody out there, and I hope and wish everybody every success on their journey to employee financial well-being.
Okay, thank you.